Thank you so much for having me. This is a pretty incredible room of people. I was just speaking to the people at my table about what they've already accomplished in second year university and saying that I probably won't teach you much tonight because the future generation and who is in this room is so much wiser than I was when I was sitting in your role. So I'm going to start off with a confession. It will make it easier for everybody in the room and for myself to go forward, which is I have no idea what the future holds. No idea. And I'm actually okay with that. And I don't know if I could get a show of hands on how many of you in the room have let the future weigh you down with anxiety. We worry about the what ifs. We worry about all of the things that we need to be doing. And this is something that I've thought a lot about recently because, we're living in this fast-paced world where it's hustle culture. We need to be working, go, go, go. And we forget to stop and realize the work that we're working on today and realize that we need to be present to produce the best outcomes in our work rather than worrying about the anxieties of the future. We can't control the future. We can prepare for the future. It's important to prepare for the future. It's important to have a plan. But with that plan, we have to understand that life doesn't go as planned. That's just the way it is. So we can prepare for that, but we can't predict it. So rather than trying to place all of our energy in worrying about the future, about something we can't control, I've recently thought about that a day and said, I actually get to control where I channel my energy. And I can channel all of my energy about the anxieties of the future, the things I can't predict, or I can be thinking about the now. I can be present in this room. I can be focusing on delivering the best speech possible to you tonight that has value. And when we do focus on the now, when we take things day by day, the quality of our work increases. Because we're living in this time when we've started to glamorize this idea of multitasking, which is insane to me because the human mind wasn't actually designed to take in all of this information at once, for one. For two, when we try to do 100 things at once, what happens? We half-ass all of them. When we try to do one thing and focus on that one thing, we do a really great job and over time build a very foundationally strong future for ourselves. So I hope you can be present tonight. There's a Zen proverb that I recently came about that's helped me to remain present, and that is very simple. It goes like this: chop wood, carry water. And when I start worrying about tomorrow and things I can't control, I'm reminded of this saying. It's so simple, but it reminds me to focus on the one task I need to complete and doing it really, really great. So I will also tell you that I was not always like this, and I'm still working on being more present. But we had a discussion just at our table tonight about how many stressors there are, about choosing a major. I was in your seat once upon a time, not half as bright as you. I went to university and I studied psychology. And, I was a terrible student. Up front, I was a terrible student. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy the content, but it was that I was in a lecture theater with 120 other kids, and there was one learning style, and it wasn't mine. It felt like everybody around me was doing great, because, you internalize everything and you think that you're the worst case scenario. And I've learned, and actually through UNB, watching UNB, I had the privilege recently to be a part of Faculty of Management Experiential Learning program and business competition. That is a kind of learning style, that is the kind of diversity in people's learning styles that I didn't have. So basically my journey was one of turning that big messy ball into what my accountant calls my brain, which is organized chaos, which is basically a journey of becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable and more familiar with the unfamiliar. And I studied psychology, and what's interesting about that is that when I went to work in the first startup company I had the privilege of being a part of, which was Hotspot Parking, I'd go to networking events and they'd always ask, what did you study? And I'd say psychology, and they'd always say, oh, that's so interesting that you took such a big leap and now you're in business. And politely I'd respond, yeah, such a big leap. In my mind, I was thinking, psychology is the study of the human mind. Psychology recognizes that there is beautiful diversity in how people are wired and how people see the world and how people perceive different situations one from the next. And I think that I'm grateful for taking that psychology because it taught me perspective. And it taught me, again, we're all wired differently, but it taught me how to walk into any room with a fresh mindset and understand that everybody in that room deserves equal access to opportunity. If you show up with a good attitude, you deserve to be at that table. If you show up with an attitude where there's a hierarchy and you're the CEO and you're, better than everyone, people will always remember that. People will always remember how you made them feel. And perspective is key, and how you choose to treat people is everything. Again, I want to reiterate the point that education is so important, and it builds you such a strong foundation for your future. But if you have a great resume and a terrible attitude, and you treat people poorly, you might as well not have a resume. The world of work is changing, and we're seeing this rise of robotics and automation, and there's two ways to think about it. You can think about it and be terrified, say my job's being replaced, the world is ending. A little dramatic, but I've seen it. Or you can use it as an opportunity to do more outside of the world of screens. Screens are no longer the sign of productivity. And that goes hand in hand with creativity. So treating people with respect, building strong relationships, and using your version of creativity to stand out is the most important skill set that you can have in today's world, where everything's being digitalized. And we're having more opportunities to be face-to-face and bridging human connections, which I think is incredible. But importantly, I just talked to a friend before coming here about this talk, and I talked about creative freedoms, and she was like, oh yeah, well, I figured you were speaking to the arts community. And I think that that's something that we all get hung up on when we think of the word creatives. We think we've got to grab a paintbrush, slap a beret on our head, and go to the gallery. That's one way to look at creativity. Another way to look at creativity is to remember that the way that your brain is wired is different than the person next to you at the table tonight. And the way that you see the world is different. And that's important for you to bring to the table, to raise your hand and bring that creative restructuring. It could be a creative restructuring of a business deal. It could be a creative restructuring of a brainstorming. But if you're using your unique creativity and working towards an impact that you're personally looking to make, that's creatively yours. And if you don't bring that and raise your hand, bring it to the table, then the world will never see that. And that's kind of sad. And it's easy for me to put up here, challenge the status quo by bringing your ideas to the table. That's easy for me to say, put it on a slide. In real life, it's scary. It's terrifying to draw outside of the lines. It's terrifying to stand out. It's terrifying to be different or try something that nobody's tried before. I get that because it takes guts. And the difference, between people like, let's say, the Beatles, people will call the Beatles geniuses. And they are, I think. I wouldn't argue that. But the difference between them is that it took guts and it took 10,000 hours of mastering their craft to get to where they are. But the difference between the Beatles and anybody in this room is that they had the guts to raise their hand and do something different. And anybody can do that. The other thing that stands in the way is this little family called the fear family, which, who's familiar with having a fear of the future, rejection, change, the unknown? This is like just the immediate family, okay? And the fear narrative is very powerful. But the thing to remember about the fear narrative is that it is completely crafted by ourselves. If you want to find good storytellers, listen to the narrative in your head when you're trying to talk yourself out of something. It's incredible. And it's irrational because you're allowing that fear monster to take the wheel and decide what you'll do in life. But the thing is if you decide one day you're going to be the one taking the wheel, that's when you start to see the change. When you decide to take the wheel and raise your hand and go out of your comfort zone and suggest an idea, and it doesn't have to be big. Actually, I have to use this rap quote because I heard it right before I walked in the door, which is Childish Gambino. Do you guys know who that is? You don't have to go big, you just do it different. And I probably butchered that quote, but little by little, take those leaps that feel uncomfortable, and that feeling of uncomfortable gets more comfortable each time. And I remember specifically for myself, in one of my first roles at a nonprofit, I was frustrated because they were not using social media and tapping into crowdfunding tools the way that I needed them to be. I wanted them to be because I wanted them to be successful. However, as you all know, nonprofits are strapped for resources and they're constantly fighting for the next dollar. And so I was sitting in this role as assistant to the development director. And my job was to take care of the donor base and put out grant applications. And because I had put myself into this box and I was so afraid of going out of the lines of that description of that job that I was in, I complained. And I used my energy rather than raising my hand and saying, actually, I know what we could do to make a bigger impact by using these tools. Until one day I was like, you know what? This is all me. I'm complaining. I can use my energy to make a plan. And so I did that. And, I prepared a speech. I was like, arms weak, mom spaghetti, so nervous. And the weirdest thing of all is that I was met with a response that I didn't actually think that I would get, because this fear monster and I had planned this big story that my boss would tell me, no, there's no way, this is a dumb idea. But I was met with a welcomed response, and she said, yeah, that sounds great, let's do it tomorrow. And as soon as I had that vote of confidence from somebody in a leadership role, it changed everything from me raising my hand into the future, and it got easier each time. And so if you're in a leadership position, giving somebody on your team that vote of confidence can go so far. And it, again, doesn't have to be big, it just has to be different. So talking about fear, there's a big fear of change because change is very scary. However, this was something that a mentor told me, and I've held on to it so tightly. Don't be afraid to change your mind. I don't know if anybody here has been afraid of changing courses, changing their degrees. Is there anybody in that position now? Okay. Change is scary, but change is not so scary when you make a plan. Because when you wake up in the morning, more often than not, going to your job or going to school, feeling that says, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Pay attention to that. Because that's when you're no longer giving your full attention and energy to that role. And when you don't give that full attention or energy, everything else falls. The whole organization goes with you. Because an organization, a team, it's like a train. And if you don't have every piece of that train working at full capacity or at the same capacity, it falls apart. And it's okay to get off that train. But importantly, you can't just jump off that train when it's going 100 miles per hour. You have to make a plan so that when you do get off the train is slowed down, it's stopped, and your team is ready for you to leave. You've left them in a great spot, and you're ready to go. You've made a plan for yourself. So don't just jump off the train, because that's not going to end well for anybody. Then enters that fear of the unknown, which is why you make a list. And when I say make a list, let's say you want to go into a brand new space, explore a new opportunity, or just something that you're not so familiar with. You're just much more content and comfortable with where you are. The best thing that I have done in my career has been reaching out to people that I admire within a space that I'm interested in. So just recently I've entered the fashion industry, the fashion world. something that I know nothing about. So I made a list of people that I admire, of people that have qualities that I would want in myself. And I reached out to all of these people. And one of my favorite questions, whether it's to talk to a mentor or to a new client, to get to the answer fastest, is what do I need to do to work with you? Because then they kind of pause and they're like, wow, that's a pretty bold question. Then they give me the answer. And so now I have a checklist of things that I need to get done in order to go work in that industry or get that client. But more importantly, it's about, again, being present, and it's about showing up. So if you have that list, you better make sure that you know why you're going to the meeting. If they take the time to give you that meeting, go with questions, but more importantly, express interest and be present and listen. There's nothing worse than showing up to a meeting with somebody who wants to pick your brain on something and their phone's sitting there and they're just not engaged. But what's exciting is when somebody shows genuine interest in the work that you're doing. And when you show genuine interest in the work that people are doing, they will give you the world, and they will likely carry you along with them, regardless of your experience. So my background has been all about changing my mind and about having a diverse background. And the Go Do, which is the name of our company, stems from growing up with my father, who put this philosophy on us from a young age. It was basically exactly what it means. It's pretty simple. Go out, try it. Doesn't work out, fine, you learn something. If it does, even better, great. This is my first business venture. I had a lackluster sales team, as you can see in my brothers. But I worked in nonprofits. I worked with a parking company, tech companies, data consulting, and recently into the product world. We've spanned into the product world. But from the beginning, when I started this company 2.5 years ago or so, I intentionally set this mission to be broad. So we design products and services that inspire people to go and do meaningful work. And that's broad on purpose, but it also serves as an anchor for us, which allows us to stick to our core. So anytime we might get, an attractive deal, we have to go back to that core and make sure that we are on a path to inspiring other people to go and do meaningful work by taking that role. And make sure that those people that we're working with have similar values. And that core is a thing that you do not make compromises around. And I think it's just as important for individuals to have a core and to have a set of values that they will not stray from, because you will go through life and be offered the best salaries, and the benefits will be so great. But if you are not aligned with the team, if your values are misaligned with who you're working with, you will find out so much quicker. And so it requires patience in finding the people that you want to work with, but patience pays off. I just want to talk about really quickly the most recent example of me changing my mind, sort of, but we had always set from the beginning to be intentional about going into products. So talking about creative confidence, I don't remember the exact moment in my life that I stopped having creative confidence. But I do know I was creative growing up. I was the kid that showed up to the dinner table with goggles and a swimming cap on just to entertain my family. And I was a kid that insisted on going to picture day with a gold medal over my floral dress. So there's proof. But there was somewhere along the way, going through school, when quirky was no longer looked at as a good thing. I actually remember deciding I was now going to be shy, and I became shy. When I talk about the fear narrative being a very powerful story, the stories that we tell ourselves, we eat them up and we live them. And I lived this narrative of not being creative, not being confident, being a shy kid, and I'm still working on that. I'm still trying to recorrect that narrative for myself. And I caught myself saying to a friend 1.5 years ago, I said, I'm not creative. And when I said it, I was shocked. It kind of hurt to say, and it still kind of hurts to say now, because I know that I am. But it's about getting rid of that narrative that I've created over so many years, because I had so many pressures from the outside world telling me that I should act this way and do this and go in this course and whatever it was, that I forgot to stick to my own core. And I think there's somebody in this room, because all of you are more wise than me somehow, and maybe 10 years younger, that when we were working on this bag one day, which is the product that we're designing. She said to me, "You have written yourself out of this story." And I was like, okay, yeah, oh shit, you're right. Thanks for your honesty. But I needed that person to tell me that so that I could start designing this bag that I wanted to design. But I had spent a lot of time going to factories, spending a lot of company money, assuming that I needed to hire people on the outside that were creative because I wasn't the creative one. And it wasn't until that conversation and until I went to a factory one day and the guy said, listen, you're never going to get your bag unless you go home and make it yourself. I didn't know how to sew, so that was like, oh, sweet, great. It's over. But entrepreneurs are persistent, so I went home and I got my great-grandmother's sewing machine off the floor of my great-grandfather's factory, and I got the 15 minutes Coles notes from my mother on how to use the sewing machine, and I went home and I sewed the bag that I had envisioned for like 4 or 5 years in my own head. I sewed the bag overnight. I didn't sleep. And I cried the next morning. I cried and I cried and I cried because I had spent so much time and money just assuming that I couldn't do it myself. That is the power of the internal mind telling you stories and you believing and internalizing them. Now, this is the bag that I sewed overnight. It's not perfect. That's the point. I was then confident to show my work. And the importance of showing your work is everything, because when you show your work, you get feedback, and feedback's probably the most valuable gift that you can get in the world, because then you get to shape your product, your service, your idea into something that is going to make even greater impact. So if I can leave you with 3 takeaways: turn fear into fire, kick the fear monster to at least the passenger seat, find your version of creativity and show the world, and go and do meaningful work. And thank you for having me.